Welcome back, guys. So, after doing a little bit further experimentation with this setup, I've decided to actually go with another way of controlling the spine. So, instead of using clusters, what we're going to do is we're going to use the CVs to drive our poly spine. So, with that, let's get started. All right, so if we open up our scene, you'll see that nothing's really changed. What we're going to start off by doing is turning off some of our selectables, which are our joints and our IK handles. We're going to make a broad selection. And then we deselected our locators in our control curve. So now we're just going to delete. Now we're going to select our NURBS, our poly spine. We're going to turn use components on. So the reason why I like to do that at the beginning is sometimes if you wait till the next step that we're going to do, which is to grab our object and then our skin object and add influence, everything still looks fine. But as soon as you go in and you select use components, then everything blows up and you have to scale it back down. It doesn't really affect the solver that much, but it does affect what you start out with. So just so that we don't have to go through any more steps, this is what I find to be the easiest. So let's go to add influences. And when you are adding the influence, you're going to want to lock the weights onto it. The default weight is going to be 1. You could set the drop off. None of this is going to matter because this object here, the poly spine, should only be influenced by our curve. So we'll click add. So now that's there. Let's go back, make sure that's selected, that we have our add influence. Now we're going to do it one more time, another skinning. Let's turn our skeleton on, select our joints, skin. Before we actually do that, let's go in and rename these. So this one will stay J1. Let's actually call this pelvis spine. Center of, let's just call this calm spine. And this one, shoulder spine. I find it's better to rename them now before we do any of our smooth binding, because this is going to give us a great working spine, but we may want to sculpt out our curves. And if we're going to sculpt out our curves, we're going to have to select the control vertices, go to Window, General Editors, Component Editor, and you can see the names here. If we kept them all joint 1, these would have still been named joint 1. So now we could look here and we're like, this should have the pelvis spine should have no control over this. We could just start work our way up and down. Pelvis will still say has no control. Let's see where we are. Go up. I personally like having the shoulders have a little bit of control. The pelvis should be the one at 8 here. We'll go with 9, 0, and 1. In fact, let's go back here. Work our way through and down. We'll make that 0.5. So we've kind of sculpted out our curve. This is what we end up with. Actually not a fan of any of that, but just want to go through and show you how to do it. Right out of the gate, I usually think it's okay. If I have any problems after I do the actual skinning, that's when I will go back in and do the sculpting. So this, if we could now see our poly object, we could see now it's controlled and everything is working a bit smoother. So you can see the way both spines are working. So it's still not absolutely perfect, but we'll bring it a little bit closer now. So if you remember when we set everything up, the ruler was set at 2. And after we did the constraints, it went down to 1.97. So what we're going to do is add in 0.03 so that we could have it evenly back at an exact 2. So we'll hit Control C so that we could copy our input. And we're just going to keep it running all the way through. There, so that's all set. So we're just going to go back, check to see how everything's working out for us. And so with that last fix, everything is right on top of each other, just like we want. All I did at the end over here was if you'll see, I just pulled this back so it snapped back to that locator there. That makes things work a little bit smoother. Now the problem is that our curves are cubic, so they're considered to have 3 points to them. We can see that in our curve creation tools. So let's go over there very quickly. You can see cubic, 5, and linear. Our polygons are linear. So if we were to use a NURB spine, we'd have to use some different controls so that we could lock on to the control points or the isoparms on our NURBs to get the same sort of latching effect that we have when we use our point on poly. So what I mean is, if you look over at animation, so our point on poly constraint is not going to work on NURBs because obviously they're not polygons. So with that, we're basically done. Now we may have to rip some of this apart, but you could see how easy it was to set up. The next thing we're going to do is add our rotational values in, and we're going to do that a little bit differently than we have before by adding another spine to this setup that will basically only have one constraint, and it's going to be all node based, which is just going to make for still a lot faster than other setups that would have used a few more constraints than this. But there's always a sacrifice. The setups that use more constraints tend to give the animator a bit more control and lets the stretchiness and the rotational values of X, let them work in, I'd say, a little bit more intuitive fashion, or they could at least be programmed in the fashion that the technical director wants. The methods that I'm showing are faster for play blasts and just overall usage while working, because they're not heavily constraint based. Also, once we're done, this is what we have as our tail. The tail will not rotate in X, so all we're going to do is duplicate this out, and there's going to be nothing else to do except import it in, stretch it as we need it along a straight line, give it some curvature when we want to work, and then we'll be all set. Actually, there's a couple more controls that we'd have to add for the playfulness of the end of the tail, and we'll get to that in a couple of videos. So with that, save your work, and I'll catch you in the next video.